Hello, welcome to Algebra 1, Lesson 95. We're almost to 100. Go ahead and turn your books. Make sure you have the book in front of you. Just looking at the board, sometimes it's not enough, especially when there's drawing and the lesson for tomorrow, there's a lot of graphs. You need the book in front of you. I don't draw good graphs. Here we're going to talk about combining rational expressions. Rational expressions are just like there's stuff going on in numerator, there's stuff going on in denominator, there is binomials, the plus or minus sign, there's x squared, there's a lot of things going on. Here, they want, to combine them all together. For example 1, we combine them by finding the least common denominator. So example 1, A and B, we're just going to find the least common denominator. Before you find what the least common denominator is, you have to make sure you factor everything from denominator. We're always focusing on denominator. When you add or subtract fractions, always make sure that they have the same denominator before you add the numerator. You never add the denominator, but you have to make sure that they are exactly the same. So now let's go ahead and find the least common denominator. Here, we can't find it yet. We have to go ahead and factor. You'll see a lot of these trinomials with the x squared, and you have to factor. So let's go ahead and factor this. The first one, 3 over x plus 3, can only be simplified as 3 over x plus 3. So there's nothing else you can factor from there. The next one is 9. You can't factor anything there. But if you look at the denominator, you can factor it. Remember, it's factors of negative 15 that gives you negative 2. So what factors of negative 15, when you add it together, you get a negative 2? That is x minus 5 and x plus 3. 5 times 3, or negative 5 times 3 gives you negative 15. Negative 5 plus 3 gives you that negative 2. So therefore you factor. You always factor. I have the steps over here because we're going to do it a little more advanced. But now, the next step is you have to find your least common denominator. It's like finding their least common multiples. It's the multiples, it means they have at least one factor. In this case, when you're dealing with binomials, it's the least common denominator. You have to include each of the binomials that they have. So let's look at each of the fractions. It looks like this one has at least 1x plus 3. They both have at least 1x plus 3, but you have to include all the factors that there are in the denominator. So there is an x plus 3, and if you notice here, there's also an x minus 5. That means your least common denominator is including all the factors that you have in your denominator. Again, it's all the factors. It's not, when you're thinking of factoring something out, you think of dividing. In this case, you're multiplying least common multiple. So like 2 and 4, you go 2, 4, 6, 8. So you're finding numbers that are bigger. So in this case here, when you have binomials, basically you just find what binomials they each have in the denominator. Only denominator. So that's the least common denominator. Next one, here we have this expression. We go ahead and simplify it. If you notice here, for this denominator, so I'm going to go ahead and simplify it. So 2x over, it looks like 4 can be factored out. So I factor out a 4, I get x squared minus 49, I believe. Yep, minus 49. And it says plus 12x over, and it looks like that denominator can also be factors. Factors of c, negative 56, that equal positive 1. That would be plus 8 and x minus 7. Yep. So if you multiply these out, you get negative 56, but if you add them, you get positive 1. So now we have this going on here. If you look at this denominator, the x squared minus 49, we have to keep in mind, this goes back what we learned about the difference of two squares. Difference of two squares meaning you can square both of them. So in this case here, I'm just going to do it on the side here. So x squared minus 49. When you have a difference of two squares, you have to make sure you undo them by dividing by 2. They have to be in terms of squared. So x squared, the square root of that is x. The square root of 49 is 7. And now your a, or your first term is x, your second term is 7, and then your new denominator, so I'm going to go ahead and put it here, is 4x plus 7 times x minus 7. So they will include this for today's lesson. Make sure you have that on the side so you know to look at that. Whenever you see, they're always in binomials, meaning they're always in 2 terms. 3 terms, you can think of this way. 2 terms, you think of this way. So now, plus in this case here, the second factor, you can't really simplify it anymore. So now we have that. What we're looking for is simply just the least common denominator. Remember, we have to include all the factors that the denominator has. Let's look at the whole numbers first. So looking at this, they have one whole number of 4. Now let's go ahead and look at the factors here. This has a factor of x plus 7. This has a factor of x minus 7. This has a factor of x plus 8. And we already wrote down the x minus 7. So you include all the factors in the denominator. So now, your least common denominator is this whole thing right here. Example 2, now we're going to talk about simplifying. Whenever they mean simplifying, they want everything in one fraction. And also, move this a little bit. They want it in one fraction, also simplified as much as you can. Meaning, make sure there's one x term, make sure there's anything that you can factor out, and then cross out. So here, we're going to go step by step. First thing you do whenever you're trying to simplify it, here is up to add it. So we're trying to make it into one fraction, we're combining. First thing we do is factor. So if you look down here, I'm going to factor each one of these. Again, it's one expression. I'm bringing everything down. You have to bring everything down when you go step by step. So I have my 6x squared over, if you look at this, this is also a difference of 2 squares. So think of your first term squared minus your second term squared. To check it, square root both of them. The square root of x squared, just x. The square root of 16 is 4. Meaning, it's going to be x plus 4 times x minus 4. Doesn't matter if you switch it. So now, my denominator is going to be x plus 4 times x minus 4. Plus, and if you look here, the numerator just stays at x minus 1. 2x minus 8. It's not a difference of 2 squares, but it looks like I can factor out a number. I can factor out 8/2. When I factor out 8/2, I end up with x minus 4. 8 divided by 2 was 4. Bring down the sign. Now, let's go ahead and find the least common denominator. So I'm going to put here the LCD. The LCD, I have to include all the factors in the denominator of both expressions. We have at least a 2. We have at least an x minus 4. This also has an x minus 4, but I'm not going to write it twice. Just going to write it once. But also, this has a factor of x plus 4. Now, from this step, you multiply. You find your least common denominator, and you multiply what you're missing on each one here. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this portion here. And let's look at this left fraction. We know we have to make it in terms of 2 times x minus 4 times x plus 4. Whenever we find our least common denominator, that's our new denominator. Now, if I look at this expression here, it looks like I'm missing something in place of this, so I can have this denominator. I have an x minus 4, I have an x plus 4, so I have these two here, but I don't have a 2. So how I can add the 2 is if I multiply the left side by 2. If I multiply the left side by 2, I multiply the top. 2 times 6x squared is 12x squared. 2 times the denominator, I end up with this expression here. Now let's look at the right side. The right side, we have a 2, we have an x minus 4, but we don't have an x plus 4. Keep in mind, I always put parentheses over my binomials. I want to make sure they are combined. I just don't multiply one number, and that's where a lot of people get confused. Put your parentheses. Now let's go ahead and combine it. So denominator, everything just multiplies. You don't want to multiply the denominator out. You just leave it like this. It doesn't matter if it's switched to. It means the same thing. But now, if you look at your numerator, you go ahead and you multiply it out. This is like saying, I'm going to put this on the side here, x minus 1 times x plus 4. This is what this numerator is saying. I'm multiplying one binomial by the other binomial, and I apply FOIL. So FOIL, I get x squared, multiply x by 4, it's going to get 4x, negative 1 times x, negative 1 times 4, negative 4. And now when I combine the like terms, I get x squared, 4x and x can be combined, I get plus 3x minus 4. And we're not done. So we multiplied it out. We multiply this side, we multiply this side. I end up with these two fractions here. And now you simplify. You can simplify by adding or subtracting them. So when I add or subtract them, I add the numerator. I get 12x squared. Well, actually, I'm going to combine everything. If I look at this, everything's in terms of addition. You can only do this with two rational expressions that are adding. When they're subtracting, I'll do something different. But here, since they're adding, since they have the same denominator, you add everything in the numerator. So I have a 12x squared, I have a x squared here. So it's adding like terms. So 12 plus 1, 13. I have a 3x here, I'm going to bring it down here, and then minus 4, I'm going to bring that down, and then my numerator, or sorry, my denominator is this expression here, and that will be my answer there. You can try to simplify your denominator, but in this case it can't be simplified. Now let's go ahead and go into example 3. So this was adding the two terms, this is subtracting the two terms. There's one step that's slightly different from this one here. We follow the same rule, we factor. When we factor this out, I noticed here that I can factor out a number. So I get 4x squared, 9x minus 27, I can factor out 9, I get x minus 3. Minus, here 2x minus 5, you can't really factor anything out, I just leave it like that. Here I have x minus 3 and x plus 3. That's step 1. Step 2, find the least common denominator. I'm just going to put here on the side, my least common denominator is, I have to include all the factors. They have a 9. They have an x minus 3. This already has an x minus 3, I'm not going to write it again. And then I'm including the other one, x plus 3. You include all the factors for your least common denominator. Now, step 3, you multiply. So I already have a 9, I already have an x minus 3, but I don't have an x plus 3 on this side. So I'm going to multiply the top by x plus 3, multiply the bottom by x plus 3. When I have that, I end up with a fraction. We'll move over here. I end up with the term of 4x squared times x plus 3 over the 9 times x minus 3 times x plus 3. Now let's move on to the next one. So minus, so I'm going to bring my minus sign down here. Go ahead and move this here. Minus, on this side, I don't have a 9 on this side. I have an x minus 3 and I have an x plus 3, so the only thing I'm multiplying on this side is just the 9. So now I have times 9 times 2x minus 5. So now I have that expression here. So I multiply both sides. I didn't really multiply it out, I just left it in terms of this so I can show you we can do step by step. So now here we have one term times a binomial. We go ahead and we distribute. So when I distribute, I'm going to show you here. You get 4x squared times x. Whenever you're multiplying, remember you add the exponents. So you get 4x cubed, and then 4x squared times 3 plus 12x squared. I'm going to put everything under one fraction. So 9x minus 3 times x plus 3. So this is simplified as that. This negative sign, I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. But now anything after the negative sign, I have to put parentheses over it. I have to. Because the negative is going to change your signs. That's why in the first step, I didn't change it. I went ahead and added it because it didn't matter. It's adding. But in this case, when you're subtracting, put the parentheses over anything you are subtracting after. Now, we do the same thing, FOIL. 9 times 2x is 18x, and 9 times negative 5 is negative 45. If you notice here, I have parentheses over it. I have a negative. To continue to simplify them, I have to go ahead and distribute my negative sign. So everything could just be in one term. So when I do that, so my denominator stays the same. I get 4x cubed plus 12x squared, and 18x becomes a negative 18x, and then this 45 becomes a positive 45, and then after that, you add all the like terms in the denominator. Remember, for terms when you're adding or subtracting, you don't add or subtract the denominator, you keep them all the same. Now, when I combine them all together, there's a 4x cubed. Actually, that's already as simplified as you can get. There's no other like terms you can add there. The x cubed, squared, x, and just the 45, and then that will be your answer. So you're going step by step to solve for them. Now for this one, we have here negative 35 over this expression plus that expression. First thing you do, you always factor as much as you can. So in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and factor these two. So negative 35 just stays as negative 35. 56 minus 7x, again, I don't like it when the number is first and the variable is second. If I were to flip it, I will get negative 7x plus 56. I'm not moving it from the equal sign, so I'm not changing any signs. I'm just switching them. So when I have negative 7x plus 56, it looks like I can factor something out. When I factor something out, I can factor out a negative 7. 7 can go into 56. So now I have negative 7. I factored out. I get x minus, I think that's an 8. Double checking. Yep, x minus 8. So 56 divided by negative 7, negative 8. Next one here, I have negative 6x minus 2. It looks like I can factor out a number, but I'm going to go ahead and do that in the very end. I'm not going to worry about that now. Negative 6x minus 2 over, and denominator can be simplified. Factors of negative 16, they equal negative 6, and that is negative 8, positive 2. Multiply it out, I get negative 16, add it, I get negative 6. Now looking at here, you look for your least common multiple. I'm just going to put right here, least common multiple is equal to, include the number, so negative 7. I have an 8 minus, or x minus 8. This one also has an x minus 8, only writing it once, and this has an x plus 2. So that means on this side, I already have a negative 7, I already have an x minus 8. I'm just going to multiply the top and bottom by x plus 2. When I do that, it's going to move over here. When I do that, I have negative 35 times x plus 2 over, I'm going to multiply everything over the same denominator. Negative 7, x minus 8, x plus 2. So for the first one, I get negative 35 times x plus 2, and I'm going to multiply it out. On this side here, I don't have a negative 7, so I need to multiply the top and bottom by negative 7. I already have a x minus 8, I already have an x plus 2. So the only thing I need to multiply is negative 7. So then I get, the middle term is plus. Then I have negative 7 times negative 6x minus 2. And I put parentheses because it's a negative. I wouldn't change this to a negative sign. I would just have parentheses over it so it can make more sense. All I'm showing is this number times this binomial here. And then the plus sign in the end because you're adding in the end. Now, let's go ahead and simplify even more. So I'm going to move to this side. I'm going to use FOIL to simplify that out. So again, same denominator. Negative 7, x minus 8, x plus 2. Negative 35 times x is negative 35x. Negative 35 times 2, I get negative 70. And then plus, I get negative 7 times 6, negative 6. Negative 7 times negative 6x is positive 42x. Negative 7 times 2, so just working over here. Negative 7 times negative 2 is positive 14. And then I go ahead and simplify even more. When I simplify even more, I get 7x minus 56. You combine this, combine this with this. And I get 7x minus 56 over negative 7, x minus 8, and x plus 2. And then you simplify even more. Now you start factoring the numerator. You don't factor the numerator until the very last step. So now, if I factor the numerator, I get 7 times x minus 8 over negative 7 times x minus 8 times x plus 2. If you notice, there's one binomial that can cancel out. This one set here and this. Remember, you can't cross out x, you can't cross out 8. You can only cancel out the whole thing. And that's x minus 8, x minus 8. Also, I have a 7 here, and I have a 7 here. Think of 7 divided by 7. That's 1. It's a fraction bar. But remember, you have to include that negative sign here. So if I simplify everything, there's nothing in the numerator, but you have to include a number there. I'm going to include the 1. This negative sign, I can't just make it disappear. I have to include it. I'm going to put it on the outside. You can put it in the denominator if you want to. And last thing is, I have a x plus 2 left over. And that is my answer here. I don't have that much time left, so just make sure you do each step. Every step is just simplifying as much as you can. B is the same exact way. If you guys need more help, make sure you let me know in the email down there. Have a good day.